Could Spider-Man survive the absolute nightmare that is Gotham City's ecosystem? Today, we are running the Gotham Experiment. On one side, you have Peter Parker, a mutant with precognitive senses, perfect equilibrium, and the ability to lift a city bus. On the other, the specialized psychological terrors of Batman's rogues gallery. Most people assume Batman's villains are dangerous because they are crazy, but scientifically, they are dangerous because they attack biological and chemical vectors that normal humans, even peak humans like Bruce Wayne, struggle to defend against. But Peter isn't human. To determine the winner, we're running calculations from neurochemistry to physics to simulate these fights. We've organized this into a tier system, ranking the difficulty from Tier F to Tier S, which represents a serious threat to Spidey's life. Let's see how he fares, starting with the clown princess of crime herself, Harley Quinn. In the Gotham hierarchy, she is a chaotic variable, deadly because she is unpredictable. She possesses peak human gymnastic skills and often wields massive cartoonish weaponry. Against a non-powered vigilante, her erratic movement pattern is a legitimate strategy because it overloads the opponent's reaction time. But against Spider-Man, this entire fighting style falls apart due to a single neurological advantage, the spider sense. Physiologically, the spider sense functions as a precognitive warning system that operates in the millisecond range, significantly faster than human neural impulses. The average human reaction time to a visual stimulus is 0.25 seconds. Harley, being an elite athlete, might operate closer to 0.15 seconds. But Peter's reaction time is effectively zero because his body responds to the threat before his brain consciously processes the image. It bypasses the visual cortex entirely. Then there is the physics of her weaponry. Harley often utilizes hammer space logic, pulling massive mallets out of nowhere. Let's apply real physics to that mallet. Even if she swings a 20-kilogram hammer with perfect form, the kinetic energy transfer is negligible to someone with Peter's durability. We are talking about a guy who has tanked mortar shells and taken direct hits from the Hulk. Think about the energy transfer here. Force equals mass times acceleration. Harley can maximize the mass with a giant hammer, but she is limited by human muscle acceleration. Spidey regularly dodges bullets, which travel at supersonic speeds. A swinging hammer is effectively stationary to him. The physical gap is too wide for acrobatics to bridge. She can't hit him, and her force generation is insufficient to cause damage, making Harley a Tier F opponent, a zero threat level that barely registers on Peter's radar. Moving into the superhuman weight class, we have Killer Croc. Waylon Jones presents a straightforward biological threat, hyperkeratosis. This condition has mutated his epidermis into hardened scale-like armor plates, and his muscle density allows him to lift approximately 2 to 3 tons. In Batman's world, Croc is a tank that requires high-grade explosives to stop. However, when we contrast this with Spider-Man's upper limits, Croc is essentially made of cardboard. Peter's strength is proportional to a spider, allowing him to lift 10 tons resting and upwards of 50 tons when under extreme stress. The force differential here is massive. Peter is roughly 10 to 20 times stronger than Croc. If they grapple, Croc isn't just overpowered, he's being handled by someone who treats cars like beanbags. But the real science comes down to the web fluid. Spider-Man's webbing is a shear thinning fluid that hardens into a material with a tensile strength exceeding steel cables. To break a standard web restraint, Croc would need to generate thousands of pounds of force per square inch instantly. His muscles are built for slow, crushing power, not the explosive expansion required to snap a polymer of that grade. Croc usually drags fights into the sewers, but this favors Spidey. In a confined tunnel, Croc's range of motion is limited, while Spidey's adhesion opens up attack vectors on the walls and ceiling. Plus, Croc's reptilian biology limits his explosive energy, whereas Spidey's high-efficiency metabolism lets him fight for hours. He effectively fights a smarter, stronger version of Croc, the Lizard, every month. This is a test Peter has already aced, placing Croc firmly in Tier D as a minor physical inconvenience. Dr. Jonathan Crane, the Scarecrow, represents a fundamental shift in threat levels. He doesn't try to break your bones, he tries to break your mind. His primary weapon is the fear toxin, a volatile psychotropic compound designed to bypass the blood-brain barrier and target the amygdala, the lizard brain responsible for the fight or flight response. In a normal human, this induces paralyzing hallucinations, but Peter Parker's physiology is a biological anomaly that changes how this chemistry equation balances out. First, we have to look at metabolic turnover. Peter's radioactive spider bite didn't just give him sticky fingers, It hyper-accelerated his metabolism. We see this in the comics constantly. He heals from broken ribs in days and burns through calories so fast, he has to eat like a competitive swimmer. This implies his liver and kidneys process toxins at a rate significantly higher than a baseline human. It is incredibly difficult to intoxicate him. The fear toxin would likely have a reduced half-life in his system, burning out in minutes rather than hours. However, there is a dangerous variable here, the spider sense. This precognitive ability warns Peter of danger, but how does it interpret a hallucination? If the fear toxin makes Peter see Green Goblin throwing a bomb that isn't there, his spider sense might register the psychological stress as a threat, creating a feedback loop of paranoia. Crane's toxin weaponizes trauma, and Peter has a lot of it. The guilt over Uncle Ben and Gwen Stacy is a psychological backdoor that Crane could pry open. If the gas hits him, Spidey isn't fighting a villain. He's fighting his own nervous system. The counter strategy is simple engineering. Peter's mask is equipped with high-grade carbon filters to block airborne particulates. He likely has the filtration tech to render Crane's delivery system obsolete. But if that mask rips, the psychological vulnerability creates a genuine danger, far beyond the pure physical attacks we have seen earlier. This elevates Scarecrow danger to Tier B. Mr. Freeze is not just a guy with a cold gun. He is a master of thermodynamics. His weaponry utilizes cryotechnology that doesn't just lower temperature, it effectively seizes atomic movement. This creates a fascinating material science problem for Spider-Man, specifically regarding his primary weapon, the web shooters. Spider-Man's webbing is a shear thinning polymer. Like most polymers, it has a specific glass transition temperature. This is the point where a flexible material becomes brittle and glass-like. Freeze hits a web line with a beam approaching absolute zero. The webbing would shatter upon impact. Then there is the biological factor. Real spiders are poikilothermic, cold-blooded. Their physiological functions slow down drastically in low temperatures. While Peter isn't fully cold-blooded, he retains some arachnid DNA traits. Extreme cold often causes his superhuman dexterity to plummet. If his muscles stiffen, he loses the agility that keeps him alive. However, Freeze has a glaring weakness: mobility. His survival suit transforms him into a walking tank, granting him Class 10 strength and incredible durability, but it makes him slow. Spidey operates at a speed that Freeze's targeting systems likely cannot track. The fight becomes a race against entropy. Spidey has to crack Freeze's helmet before the ambient temperatures embrittles his webs. It is an environmental hazard, but one physics suggests Peter can outrun, landing Freeze in Tier C. Dr. Pamela Isley represents a massive escalation because she doesn't need to hit you to beat you. She just needs you to breathe. Her primary weapon isn't the giant killer plants, it's pheromonal manipulation. She releases specialized spores that bind to receptors in the hypothalamus, effectively overriding the limbic system to bypass willpower and induce infatuation or sedation. Here's the counterintuitive part. Spider-Man's powers might actually make him more vulnerable here. His sensory input is dialed up to 11. He hears heartbeats and sees in slow motion. It stands to reason his olfactory sense is equally enhanced. If he processes smells more intensely than a normal human, a pheromone cloud that makes Batman dizzy might knock Peter out cold instantly due to sensory overload. However, we have to look at the delivery system. Ivy's control relies on human biology. Peter is a mutant. His DNA has been rewritten by retroviral gene therapy via the spider bite. There is a legitimate scientific argument that Ivy's toxins, which are chemically key to Homo sapiens receptors, might fail to bond correctly with Peter's mutated physiology. Contrary to Scarecrow toxins, which are tied to brain receptors, Ivy's toxins are closely tied to human pheromone absorption, which makes its effectiveness somewhat questionable to a spider-human hybrid. With pheromones failing, Ivy's only chance to beat Spider-Man would be to use her vines. In a dense city like Gotham, she can turn the entire battlefield against him. Spidey relies on surfaces to land and jump. If every surface is covered in toxic pollen or crushing vines, his mobility is taxed. He has to stay airborne, burning more calories and limiting his offensive options. But physically, this is a joke. We are talking about a hero who plays tag with Dr. Octopus's titanium tentacles. A plant moving at biological speeds is essentially standing still. If Ivy animates a giant Venus flytrap, Spidey just needs to web the articulation points. Plants lack the leverage mechanisms to break the high tensile polymers, though Ivy's environmental control and potential pheromone attack still makes her a solid Tier B biological threat. Now we arrive at the heavyweight champion of Gotham, Bane. His threat comes from the drug Venom, a super steroid that floods his system, rapidly increasing muscle mass and aggression. At his absolute peak, pumped full of venom, Bane can lift approximately 3 to 4 tons. That is terrifying to a human, but to Spider-Man, that's a warm setup. We need to look at the physics of proportional strength, but as we discussed in the Killer Croc matchup, Peter can lift up to nearly 50 tons under duress. Mathematically, Spider-Man is 5 times stronger than Bane's absolute maximum output. If they lock hands in a test of strength, Bane isn't pushing Peter back. Peter is accidentally ripping Bane's arms out of their socket. Let's apply Newton's second law. Force equals mass times acceleration. Bane generates force through mass. He is huge. Spider-Man generates force through acceleration. He hits with the strength of a freight train but moves with the speed of a bullet. When Spidey punches, the kinetic energy transfer is exponential compared to Bane's sluggish haymakers. Bane is a wrestler. He relies on grappling. Spidey is a frantic acrobat. Grapplers struggle against strikers who refuse to engage in the clinch. Every time Bane reaches out, Spidey is already on the ceiling. Bane's famous strategy, the backbreaker, relies on human skeletal density. Spider-Man has reinforced skeletal structure and muscular density durable enough to survive being punched through brick walls by Rhino. Bane could theoretically get Spidey over his knee, but he lacks the PSI required to actually snap the spinal column. We also have to consider metabolic cost. Venom is a temporary boost. Spidey's endurance is superhuman. Bane is on a timer, while Peter is running a marathon. Finally, Bane is a tactical genius, but intelligence has a hard limit against precognition. You cannot ambush someone who knows you are there before you strike. Ultimately, Bane is just a smarter, slower, weaker version of the Rhino, earning him a Tier D ranking as a physical challenge similar to Killer Croc. We now face the most physically problematic entity in Gotham, Basil Karlo, aka Clayface. This fight represents a fundamental shift in physics. Until now, every opponent has been a solid object, but Clayface is essentially a sentient, non-Newtonian fluid. This creates a nightmare scenario for a hero whose primary offensive output is kinetic impact. When Spider-Man punches a solid object, the force is transferred into the target, causing structural failure, broken ribs, or concussions. But if he punches Clayface with 10 tons of force, that energy doesn't break anything. It disperses. Through the principle of viscosity and fluid dynamics, the impact energy ripples through Karlo's biomass and dissipates, allowing him to reform instantly. It is the equivalent of trying to punch the ocean. The harder you strike, the more fluid simply moves around the fist. Spidey's greatest asset, his proportional strength, is rendered mathematically useless against a target with no fixed structure. The danger level escalates when we analyze the suffocation risk. Spider-Man has a high aerobic capacity, but he still needs to breathe oxygen. Clayface's primary kill tactic involves expanding his biomass to envelop the target, filling the room and the victim's lungs with living mud. This ignores durability entirely. He cannot dodge an attack that occupies every cubic inch of available space. However, Peter has a specific data set that Batman lacks: experience with granular shapeshifters. He fights Sandman and Hydro Man regularly. He understands that amorphous solids rely on specific molecular bonds to maintain cohesion. The scientific counter here isn't a fist, it's chemistry. Peter would likely realize that he needs to disrupt the ionic bonds holding Karlo together. Against Clayface, Spidey would likely modify his web fluid with a chemical solvent to freeze Karlo's viscosity, but this requires prep time. In a random encounter without specific chemical tools, Clayface is arguably the deadliest physical threat because he negates Spidey's agility and strength simultaneously. This high lethality risk pushes him into Tier A. Finally, we reach the apex predator of Gotham, not because he is strong, but because he is the antithesis of logic, the Joker. Physically, he is a Tier F threat. He is a normal human with no combat training. One punch from Peter, pulled or not, could be lethal. But the Joker operates on chaos theory, and this presents a unique, potentially fatal glitch for the spider sense. It does not detect intent, and it struggles with complex moral dilemmas. The Joker doesn't just attack, he creates lose-lose scenarios. If Joker rigs 2 fairies to explode, the spider sense might scream danger everywhere, effectively blinding Peter with sensory overload without offering a solution. The sense relies on a stimulus response loop. Danger implies a dodge, but you cannot dodge a choice. Joker attacks the psychological framework of the hero, and Peter's psyche is held together by a very thin thread of guilt and responsibility. Then there is the chemical warfare aspect. Joker venom is a weaponized neurotoxin that forces facial muscles into a rictus grin and causes rapid cardiac arrest. Unlike Scarecrow's fear gas, which is metabolic, this is often depicted as an acute lethal agent requiring a specific antidote. Peter's metabolism is fast, but is it fast enough to synthesize an antibody before his heart stops? It's a gamble, but the true danger is verbal. Spider-Man talks. He quips to mask his insecurities and distract opponents. This works on thugs. It would be catastrophic against Joker. The Joker thrives on dialogue. He would weaponize Peter's constant talking, analyzing the insecurities behind the jokes, and tear Peter apart psychologically. Batman survives because he is a stone wall. Joker would exploit Peter's rigid no-kill rule to break his spirit, making that psychological nightmare the only true Tier S threat in Gotham. So looking at the data, the verdict is clear. Physically, Spider-Man absolutely annihilates Gotham's rogues. His strength, speed, and durability operate on an evolutionary tier that makes Bane look like a toddler. But Gotham isn't a physical challenge. It's a psychological torture chamber. The science suggests Peter survived the fights, but the chemical and mental warfare might leave him broken. Subscribe for more breakdowns.